would it be to
Are the
record?
three buttons down at the bottom?
It says it's recording now. If whoever...
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. More. Yeah, I'm going to more. I don't see anything.
You can also give me host permissions, and I could. Oh, okay. Afia, it looks like.
Oh.
Okay,
just
okay, doctor. Okay, you're recording because I was like, okay. So, okay, sorry about that, y'all. But basically, I just wanted to give just a little backstory, and speak of an ancestor that's really important to me in this process. I was taking intro to psychology at Howard to fulfill a general education requirement. I wasn't taking it because I wanted to do psychology or mental health. And I was learning about Frantz Fanon, who's a psychiatrist, in my class, but I was also learning about Frantz Fanon in my African nationalism class in the political science department, which is totally different from the psychology department. So then I started making these connections between our political states, our economic states as Black people, and what's going on in our minds. And he, in his writings, he came up with this concept called Manetian, the Manetian world, basically, which comes from this idea of having binaries. And basically the idea is that everything that is Black is bad and everything that is white is good. And this trickles down to the environments. So where Black people live, there's poverty, there's broken windows, there's all these things. The things that Black people do, the way they sing, the way they dance, the way they think, it's backwards, it's wrong. And this trickles down to our spirituality. And it's very psychologically damaging to have someone tell you that your name is evil, that your spirituality is evil, while they're also committing evil acts against you, like rape and killing and all of this, right? So today, it's not really about like shunning other religions. It's really about embracing the beauty and the healing that's in our traditions that have been basically stripped away from us and basically been turned into something that it's not, to kind of scare us from ourselves. So I want to take a moment now. I invite everybody to kind of think about any ancestors that are close to you. They could be from your bloodline. They can be from a collective ancestor that a lot of us as Black people know. And also think about the ancestors who are guarding the land that you live on. Most of us are here in the US, but we may have a few international people here. Wherever you are in the world, what ancestors guard the place where you live? Who are the original people of that land? And the plants as well, the plant spirits of that land that are guarding and protecting that space. Taking a time to just honor that. And with 3 deep breaths, filling yourself with gratitude and remembrance of their divine support for you. Thank you all for taking time to do this exercise with us. Another ancestor I want to bring to mind is one of my own personal ancestors. His name is King Rudolph Douala Mangabel, and my family's from Cameroon, but I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. And he was the king while the Germans were colonizing Cameroon. There was Portuguese people that were there informally, then German, then after the Germans got kicked out by the French and the French and the British came in. And so his father was somebody who basically had one of the earlier interactions with white folks and kind of pandered to them in certain ways and didn't really realize how detrimental things were going to be. He allowed certain things to go on culturally, changing folks' names, right? Like Rudolph and Bell and these names. These aren't really our names, right? And King Rudolph, when it was his time to come to power, he was raised in Europe. He was doing everything the white folks wanted him to do, and he thought that he could speak to them as an equal about the injustices that were happening under German occupation. And basically, that wasn't the case. They dismissed him. He wanted to get rid of the plantations that were happening. It was not like chattel slavery like they have here, but it was very dehumanizing still. And there are other parts of Africa where there was that type of stuff going on, but this not in Cameroon. But there was a lot of injustices. There was a lot of lack of control over our cultural selves and a lot of cultural deaths. You know, like people, and a lot of people on my dad's side of the family, some of them know the language, some of them don't because of this. And he was basically had the Germans basically conjured up a scheme and made up lies about him so that he could get convicted of treason, because when you're in a colony, you are part of that country. So they were essentially part of Germany. And they executed him for trying to speak up about what's going on. And when I think about that, and I think about my personal family history and the importance of reclaiming these practices, I want to remind people that simple cultural things like names, languages, songs, all of these things, we think they're simple, but they hold so much weight. So that's something I just want people to think about, and think about the ways in which they've demonized certain things, like connecting to our ancestors, which is what helped the Haitians during the revolution, right? Their ancestors speaking to them through their intuition and things of that nature. But then, you know, they turned it around and flipped it and made it scary zombies, people walking around the dead. And that's not really what was happening, right? So these are some of the things that I've been thinking about and would like to share. And I'd like to hand over the floor to Tayoka now to talk about your experience with this topic and kind of what brought you here.
First, I just want to say I appreciate everyone who is here right now. I just ask that the Creator and our ancestors and my Orishas, they, guide my speech and guide my spirit while I speak and talk to you all. But really what started my journey was seeing that in mental health specifically, was understanding that a lot of the women in my family, specifically my mother and my sister, deal with like certain mental health issues like anxiety and depression, and learning about these things later on in life, while then going to college at Winston-Salem State University and having so many Black women and men and tell me about their mental health, I guess instabilities or being institutionalized and all of these different things, and understanding that my mom instilled in me that it's okay to talk about the importance of mental health. So, and we also being very invested in learning about the Black radical tradition. How have, people before me resisted these ideas of these dehumanizing ideas of what it means to be a human being? What are these ideas that our ancestors held and carried, right? So for me, growing up and wanting to learn that, being a freshman in college and seeing all of this, I guess like these mental illnesses take place, it really allowed me to create space for folk. And also me realizing that I had a lot of psycho-spiritual situations happening to me, and I didn't have anyone to really talk to about these things. But continuously like learning as I went on and learning as I created space. So I created the Smile campaign while I was at Winston-Salem State University, and I created healing circles. I allowed space for students to talk about the things that happen. I incorporated meditation, affirmations, and as time went on, as time went on, I also began to dive more into my studies as an Africana studies student. And a lot of my passion was in spirituality, and me also being a life path number 7, if you're into numerology, and me learning about me constantly wanting to learn more about just spirit. It brought me back to myself and my traditions. I also grew up and I had experiences where my grandfather would teach me about certain herbs that would be on the side of the road. And I would, go bow and arrow shoot and all of these different things. And I wanted to learn, more. I wanted to bring these ideas to people, to my community in any way that I could. So me learning and thinking about all of these things alongside me seeing how even Eurocentric cultural thought has demonized these ways of thinking and being as something as being evil. And a lot of, Black and brown people also looking at their traditions as being something that's evil. It really bothered me, because while I'm seeing this happen in my community and I'm seeing this disassociation, I'm also reading about Palmares, the Quilombos of Palmares, and these Maroon communities in Brazil, and how the foundation of their communities was rooted in African spiritual systems. It was rooted in Candomblé. So many of these great African civilizations and indigenous civilizations that we see it or read about, it starts with African spiritual systems being the base of what it means to be a human being. So, as time went on, I began to dive more into my research. And as I dived more into my research, I dived more into myself. I dived more into understanding my association to Candomblé. Odisha began to come into my life. I began to understand that my ancestors have always been with me, even in these psycho-spiritual situations that I've had in my life. I wanted to share with you, I had an ancestral reading done at one sisters told me, they were like, you need to protect your Ori and like protect your head, protect your mental health. And that's what I thought about, because as being a Black woman and, living in a world where it teaches Eurocentric culture, we have to call it what it is. Eurocentric cultural thought, it teaches exploitation, domination, it teaches violence. Okay, it shows up in so many places in the world that can be very intimate to us, even in our relationships with our parents, with our lovers, and even outside in the world when it comes to what foods can we eat, what access do we have to different things. So for me, it was like a totality of everything, and coming into this understanding and recently graduating from Winston-Salem State University, and me still being an Africana studies student and wanting to be a writer, and also creating 7 Soul Botanicals that, uses the power of minerals, the power of herbs, the power of plants, to really help people work through these different emotions and psycho-spiritual not even ailments, but situations and lessons and generational curses that need to be released, has been something that has been really healing for me. And that's really just been my association up until this point. I really want to create and write and help people heal moving forward, and see the connection between understanding who you are as a spiritual being and a human being from an indigenous perspective, and what does that mean to resisting these modes of oppression, resisting the violence and the degradation that we see, resisting it any way that we can, because that is how our ancestors survived. And there's so many people, like the people who are in this talk, the speakers, who remember, and remembering is a form of resistance. And I'm grateful to have ancestors around me and people around me, and just that guidance to constantly allow me to remember and allow me to learn more and more about who I am, and share that with the world. So that's been my association. That's who I am. I'm also the researcher in Amani, and I'm grateful to just be holding this space and constantly growing and learning in these traditions and connecting Black spirituality, African spirituality to the Black Psyche, and what that means for us moving forward. So I'm super duper grateful to just be sharing space with you all, and I hope something that I said resonated.
Thank you. And I just want to give you a shout out real quick. From Seven Soul Botanicals, I bought this rose water. It has also has jasmine in it, geranium, very herbs that deal with nurturing what they call feminine energy, but like nurturing mother energy and like Venusian energy. And I'm an astrologer, and I have a lot of Venus energy in my chart that I have to learn to activate. So just
Yes.
giving y'all, a little heads up to hit up her shop if you're interested.
For sure. We're definitely in
I'm
the transition stage right now. Sorry, we're definitely in the transition stage right now. So you can order the waters, but definitely if you follow us on Instagram, you'll see the transition to the actual site and its connection to my writings as well. So I definitely appreciate you, Elmina. And the herbs and the essential oils that I use, they're connected to that energy. So I appreciate you.
And I also want to take a quick second to just say, because you mentioned that you are doing the research for us, and I want us to understand that research takes so many forms. There's like the studies that we learn about in school, but our ancestors were researching, but they married spirit and science together. It wasn't separate, and that was also a form of research. Divination, these things that we do, the readings, studying nature, reading leaves, even cards, symbols, all of those things is also a form of research. So I'm going to turn it over now to our first speaker, Mama Mignon Grayson, and she's going to be talking about the pathway to African spirituality, dispelling the negative stigmas. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's an honor to be here with everyone today, and thank you. My heart is full hearing the intro comments from both Elmina and Tayokia. As someone who has walked the path of Indigenous path for many years spiritually, and it really, really warms my heart the way you all have embraced it and understand its significance in your lives and how to heal and how to live a fulfilling and elevated life, because connecting to our ancestry, connecting to our roots and our heritage is important. And we were cut off from that for so very long. And even now, it's held back a little bit. It's held into, the kind of shadowy segments. And fortunately for our youth coming up, our young folk, y'all taking it by the helm and doing what you need to do. I am a founder of an organization which I started called Sacred Mysteries Worldwide. And one of the reasons why I started it was because of the ancient indigenous practices that through my own personal experience, I saw the wisdom and the healing all along the way throughout my journey, and how holistic it is and how it takes into account all of you and your relation to nature, your body, your mind, your spirit, your emotions. Every facet of being human and part of nature is taken into consideration. So I saw that, and I wanted to bring those teachings to others. And it was very important to me that these teachings be brought to the world through people who are from those cultures. We have a lot of other folks who are learning and training, but they don't have the ancestral connection. So I wanted to make sure that authenticity was there. So that was the reason why I started that organization. And, we will be starting classes in the near future. I'm also an interspiritual Indigenous faith minister. I'm an ordained minister. And the reason why I became interspiritual was to work with people, helping them direct themselves in particularly in Indigenous pathways. And there's not much leadership, maybe perhaps in the areas of where they are, so they have someone to tap into or some way to help journey into their faith and discover what that is for them. And so anyway, I'm so honored to be here, and I wanted discussing this topic is so near and dear to my heart. It's affected my family in many ways. So I'm just so glad that this is being discussed. I also want to start by saying that, to acknowledge that this is Hoodoo Heritage Month. I don't know how many people are aware of that, but it's Hoodoo Heritage Month, which pays homage to the African American version of ancestral traditions that survived in the United States in the form of mixing with Christianity and also the herbal remedies and healings. And that's what helped sustain the enslaved Africans, our ancestors. It helped to sustain them and keep them, you know, throughout the most horrific form of slavery known to humankind. And so they relied on these traditions in order to heal, in order to cope, in order to, you know, survive, so that we can be standing here today and having this conversation together. So I want to give a little shout out to that, so that we know that, you know, we are in this flow and we're honoring our ancestors. And I just wanted to say thank you to them for their love, their strength, devotion, in order to allow us to be here today. So anyway, going into the topic and how I came to African-centered indigenous spirituality. First, a little background. I'm going to backtrack a little bit, some number of years, so to help understand how I was influenced. I was raised in the 60s and the 70s. My formative years were in the 70s, and I was influenced by the times. I am the beneficiary of a number of movements that were taking place before my birth and as I was growing up, such as the Pan-Africanist Congress, Harlem Renaissance, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, Black Panthers, Black is Beautiful. All of those movements were going on when I was a child. And what happened was they influenced me. You know, I grew up in New York City, and in New York City, you had all of that was really going on all over the city. So that helped to open myself up to my history and my ancestry. Also happening at the same time was the influx of people from around the world, from the Caribbean, from Africa, from different parts. And in New York City, they came to the city, and we were, you know, learning about them and being exposed to other cultures. So that also helped to open me up to African culture. But the biggest thing I have to say is that it was the performing arts, the Black performing arts was huge in bringing African spirituality to the United States. You had, I grew up with parents who were part of a big, how would you say, a groundbreaking movement of Black cultural arts. I don't know if you all have heard of Catherine Dunham, but she was an anthropologist, a Black woman born in the United States, an anthropologist who studied the dances from the Caribbean, the African dances from the Caribbean. And with that, she started her own all Black dance company. And you're talking the 30s, 40s, and the 50s. And she took that all Black company all around the world. And she studied the dances, and she created all of these different choreographies, and they were beautiful, the costumes and everything. So having that as an influence as a child, we went to either the dances, along with the dances and the music and the drums came the culture, because as African people, our history, it's all intermingled. You know, dance and art is not separate from culture. And the dance and the art always reflected the spirituality of the people, and it was used as a tool to connect spiritually. So there you have the African dancing and the drumming, and so we're all going to these classes, and you know, and then you have, you know, then you start to learn about the Orisha, you start to learn about ancestors, you know, and all of that. So that's how, you know, I kind of got started with it. Also, you had an influx of Cubans who preserved the African tradition in Cuba, and they were coming into the US as well. So you had a lot of different ceremonies going on. And so through the dance, you got connected in that way. So the Black performing arts did a lot in terms of bringing, exposing us to the African cultures. And these cultures that were in particular were Nigeria, Ghana, Dahomey, Haiti, Cuba, Trinidad, all of that. So anyway, and I also want to say I grew up in an era where on my birth certificate it says Negro, okay? Negro, that's where I grew up. So you had the influx of the emergence of Black pride and Black civil rights movement. And so there was a thirst during that time for an identity that went beyond Negro, that went into who am I as a person beyond this identity that is here in this country. And so we wanted the roots. So it called to us, you know, the roots of Africa called through the dance, through the music, through the drums, and through the spirituality. So there were a lot of us that embraced that, and it started to be a way of life for us. But also, you know, going on at the same time, you still had the negative connotations, you know, and as a result of trying to keep African people that were enslaved down, you know, they put in that whole stigma of African spirituality being negative, being devil worship, being all of those things that we know that still are here today. So those of us that involved ourselves in African tradition, we were seen as the oddballs. So, but we persisted and maintained ourselves. And so that's basically how I was able to get involved. And we're talking an involvement that's about 30 years plus old for me. And as I embraced spirituality, African-centered spirituality, it started to provide me with a way to heal and with a way to understand myself as a human being and as a spiritual being. So it began my journey towards a more wholesome and more stable self. Embracing the Orisha tradition and Apollo tradition and the resurrection of ancient Kemet was going on, and the Indigenous American spirituality created a wealth of healing and personal development for me, body, mind, and spirit. It wasn't until I began my spiritual journey that I started to understand exactly who I was as a spiritual being, understanding the integral parts of myself as a human, spirit, body, and mind, and emotions, and to understand that I have the destiny that I came here to fulfill. With the guidance and support of our ancestors and our Orisha, and any of the indigenous spirits that we bring into our lives, they will help us to elevate to our destiny. And to understand that we are all ancestors returned. I'm an ancestor returned. You're an ancestor returned. So that connection, yes, that connection of who we are, it goes beyond the here and now. We are ancestors returned, and we connect to a host of ancestral spirits, lineage, and all of that. So that gives you a sense of strength, of belonging, of not being alone, of understanding that this is a journey, of understanding that that you have loved ones that are there in an ancestral form that are supporting you. This centered me and provided me a sense of stability from where I can navigate life in a more holistic manner, feeling more safe, feeling more secure, feeling supported, and definitely feeling here on purpose. Yes. So anyway, as I started to grow into my my spirituality, I understood also that nature, you know, because, you know, growing up with a Western mindset, nature is nature. We're supposed to dominate nature. We're supposed to be in control and all of that. But no. Nature, we are part of nature. And understanding nature, you work with the forces of nature, the forces of nature, our spirits as well. And that's a whole pantheon to probably go into another day, but to understand that you're a part of nature and that you work within the harmony, work within the energy, and work within the cycles of nature. When you understand that things are cyclical, then you understand that energy is it is what everything is. You understand that you must know the timing of things. Because a lot of times what we're doing is that we're fighting against a bigger force, which is nature and the heavens, the cosmos. So we're not taught how to live in harmony with that. So in life, we're trying to push, we're trying to do this, we're trying to get somewhere, we're trying to accomplish this. It's not time. But you feel like everything's against you because you're not aware that it's just not time. It's time now to rest, depending on, you being able to understand what's going on energetically. It's time to rest. So, having that wisdom, you're able to get insight through divination, through understanding the cycles, and be able to work within those cycles so that you can be successful and at peace and harmony with not only yourself, but with the energy around you and your spirits, because your ancestors are there trying to guide you and help you all along the way. And your realization of this will always work in your favor. So when I began to see through a spiritual lens, the deep reverence became a part of my everyday experience. Gratitude, holding precious what only God could create, nature. God, nothing, no one else can create nature but the creator. So when you understand that, then you recognize the interconnectedness of all life and that you are a part of that flow. Now, it is a belief when it comes to illness that illness begins spiritually first and imbalance spiritually first. And that if you are in tune and you're understanding what's going on, you can identify that balance early on and get it adjusted and it only be an energetic imbalance that you get adjusted and then you move on. But if it goes undetected, it can start to how would you say, intensify to the point where it settles in your body as an actual physical illness. So that's why maintaining your connection to your spirituality is important in order to early identify things so they don't settle in your psyche and in your physical body. Speaking specifically with the Orisha tradition, for me, when you as a devotee, you're given many tools that you can nurture yourself spiritually with. So you have a certain amount of autonomy and you're empowered to support your life on a spiritual basis. Tools that connect you spiritually so that you can check in and make sure adjustments are done to bring about balance. Because it's all about always going to balance. You don't stay balanced, but you have to get there in order to make sure that you can operate from a space of health and healing. So anyway, you're given a lot of tools, but you're not only on your own, you are also have a community of priests and priestesses, spiritual brothers and sisters that you can go to help you when your own situation may be something that you can't handle alone. So you can always tap in. And that's the beauty of Indigenous centered spirituality, health and healing, is that you're not alone and that you are connected to a wider web and net of people that can help, instead of you going to one therapist or one doctor over here and getting one opinion and that you have to go to many. You have a plethora of wisdom within your community. And that also gives you a sense of security and feeling like, life is something that is manageable and happy and, that you can continue on and on and on in health and healing. And it's similar, in most traditional Indigenous practices. The ancient wisdom is available for us to access, but if you're brainwashed, which some people still are, you're thinking that it's something that doesn't have, it's bogus or it doesn't have much weight. So it keeps a lot of us away that aren't as informed. So, getting a platform like this and getting the word, the wisdom, the knowledge out that healing can be sought through these mediums, especially mental health as well. is something that is so, so very important. And I thank, you all for your work. Now, I want to share also a personal story about my daughter. My daughter suffered from mental illness. She was diagnosed as having complex PTSD. And her condition got so severe that she had extreme anxiety, extreme depression, and she couldn't even leave the house. Now she's better in large part to the Ifa Orisha spiritual medicine. She did get traditional Western therapy, but that was short-lived as soon as the ancestral traditions came into play. It was divine for her what was needed. It was, and the whole system, the initiations, the ceremonies, the spiritual baths, the prayers, all of that came into play. And then on top of that, I also helped her with other indigenous healing modalities, such as crystal therapy, my ancestral intervention as well. So I also added a lot of different therapies as well on top of that. And over time, it wasn't, quick, it wasn't a magic wand, but over time she was able to stabilize. She was prescribed Prozac, which she never took. She said her own internal wisdom was like, Mom, I don't want you to touch that stuff because I know it's going to do something to me that is not going to be good. So I'd rather work. So we did a lot of natural therapies, remedies, and all of that. And I'm happy to say that she is doing very well now as a result. So anyway, the process was multi-layered. And so it really, really, really was something that was, I was happy to do. And happy to see her go through the healing, and happy to be able to depend on these traditions in order for her to get better. Let's see, I think my time is almost over, but I also wanted to say, to emphasize that indigenous spiritual systems provide such a well-rounded framework which addresses all levels of healing and concerns in every other part of our lives. It's not just only the physical and mental healing, but you get uplifted in all of your life. You get to find out what directions to take. You are not seen as separate parts. You are seen as a whole that needs to be healed. So you get medicine for all parts of who you are. So anyway, I want to leave you with this. In my personal experience, African and indigenous spirituality connects you profoundly to your inner world, your spirit, where everything emanates from and begins. And you can have and receive profound healing, balance, and peace, both physically and mentally. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wanted to, share that experience with you. And hopefully, you can gain something from what I've shared.
Thank you so much for sharing. Just for the people who were just coming in and just knowing the layout of the program, all the speakers are going to share, and then we will have at the end time for Q&A if you had a question for a specific speaker. Now we're going to go on to our next speaker, Dr. Afia Bilishaka. She was my psychology professor, and I admire her so much. And she's a psychologist, a researcher, and a psychotherapist. So I'm going to hand this over to you. Let's see. There we go.
All right, greetings, everyone. Thank you so much, Almina, for inviting me to join you all today in healing and wellness. Like Almina said, I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor, and I also do hair. So I developed something called psychotherapy, where I use hair as an entry point into mental health services. And so it's a highly spiritual act to do someone's hair. There's a lot of energy being exchanged. And so I'm mindful of the work that's needed to do this. But Almina wanted me to talk about African psychology. And so being the professor that I am, she put the pressure on me to say that I was one of her favorites. So then I literally just made a PowerPoint during this. sitting here, I don't know, maybe it's just I need to do things with my hands sometimes. So if I looked all like this, I was writing a PowerPoint. So I asked her privately if I could share it. So I'll just share what I made in the past few minutes. So thank you for that. I like to have visual aids. I want to share. It says I don't have the ability to share.
I think it's supposed to send me a notification to ask, maybe. Let me see if I can, multiple participants can share. Okay, how about now?
Okay, now I can do
Cool.
it. Thank you. She knew what she was getting involved in asking me to come. You can't give all that information about discovering the field of psychology at Howard and not expect a Howard/UDC professor to speak on it. So a call to healers. What is the spiritual role of clinical psychologists? So I just wanted to put this, it's very black and white because I made it in the past few minutes, but again, I'm Dr. Afia and Billy Shaka, a clinical psychologist. That's my Instagram, at Dr. Afia. So I really wanted to get into concepts of what healing really is. I like to use the work of Dr. Thomas Parham, where he says healing is therapeutic, but not all therapy is healing. So to really make a distinction that although all these different ways exist in mental health to address, our needs, it doesn't always work. And so I love Aikwe Arma. If you haven't read the book, The Healers, I highly recommend it. And there's a quote from that book saying, the healing work that cures a whole people is the highest work, far greater than the cure of single individuals. So to recognize that as African people, we do not heal in isolation. That does not exist, right? We have to come together and have community. We are relational. And so to recognize that's the type of work that we need to address even our mental health concerns. Let me move this over here. All right. And then to even go with Malidoma Some, by far the Some family, well, Sabonfu, who's now an ancestor, or Malidoma Some, they have great work related to defining healing. So healing, by definition, is this process of coming closer to nature, to the nature around us, as well as the true nature within. And so I really want to honor when Elmina was in my research methods class, she did a whole study on using nature to heal mental health concerns. So she did a whole project on ecotherapy. Is that what it's called, Amina? Ecotherapy? All right, ecotherapy. And basically was making an argument throughout class that through being in nature is the way that we can cure some of our mood disorders and anxiety disorders. So that always stood out to me, how she was very passionate about that topic. All right, let's keep going. All right, people put in the names of it. So I feel like we definitely need some new definitions or conceptualizations of mental health. So like the Ia was speaking earlier, her daughter did not feel like Prozac would be a good fit, right? That did not address the deeper concern that she was negotiating. So we have to ask ourselves questions about what constitutes mental health. So if you want, you can write that into the chat. What do you think what is mental health? What is the nature of distress? Meaning, what causes us to have psychological concerns? What do you all think? How and why do people change? And then specifically going into what is the role and the task of the healer, and what and who can heal. So actually when therapy is happening, right, between me and my clients in my private practice, what is actually occurring there? What is my responsibility versus what is leading to change in that person's life? I put some stuff in the chat. I'm just, sorry, I'm like moving things around so I can get this. All right, so in terms of defining mental health, I like to lean on my elders and ancestors to define. So Dr. Thomas Parham, like I was saying, is one of my Jegnas or mentors. And he argued in his book, The Psychology of Blacks, mental health is to be in touch with your spiritual essence. having knowledge of yourself as a cultural being, having access to support, and having order in your life. Or in 1996, Farrakhan actually came to the Association of Black Psychologists, an organization that I participate with, and I think actually how I met Elmina as well, is living in accord with the nature, aim, and purpose of one's creation, right? This is very highly spiritual stuff. Or even Fukuyao, a Congolese ancestor now, in his book, he has a few books like Kindezi, which is the art of babysitting, or books about how to do self-therapy. And he argues that mental health is having balance or harmony with oneself, one's environment, and the universe, right? So to be very clear about, we need new definitions, right? These definitions are not going to be in a psychology textbook as we know it in terms of Western psychology, or it's not going to be in the book that has all the disorders, the DSM. So, okay, great, right in the book. So we really need to think about, well, what is African psychology? Because this is what Elmina said. Can you speak to define what African psychology is? Well, we'll go with this definition. The scientific field that focuses on how people of African descent know and experience the world. So it does combine Black studies and psychology, and it appreciates Black culture. So like Elmina was saying, the whole way she got into psychology as a field is she recognized the connection between what was being discussed in her psychology class at Howard and what was being discussed in her Africana studies classes, in the overlap being Frantz Fanon, right? So Frantz Fanon is a famous psychiatrist who is now an ancestor, but he really focused on identity and liberation movements. And he always asked people to answer these 3 following questions. He said, we always need to be answering the question of, who am I? Am I who I say I am? Am I all I ought to be? Again, who am I? Am I who I say I am? Am I all I ought to be? And so he highly connected those questions to our mental health, right? To have a clear understanding of self. And like I've been referencing Dr. Thomas Parham, who was the most influential in me understanding African and Black psychology. He always would present Frantz Fanon's work, and he defines mental health, like I was saying earlier, is like a key to mental health is self-knowledge. Again, a key to mental health is self-knowledge. So to really understand who you are and value yourself. So that being so critical in terms of having a healthy mind, body, and spirit. And so I do want to bring up the concept of Mayat. So just like I was saying that African psychology is focusing on knowing and experiencing the world from an African mind and body and spirit, I have identified Mayat as one of the key foundations for how I work therapeutically. So I have a company named Mayat Psychological Services. And so I use this very ancient Kemetic concept to guide my therapeutic interventions. So Mayat can be represented as a goddess or a deity, as a woman with a feather in her hair, right? And so this feather was supposed to be used at the weighing of the heart ceremony. Basically, when someone was making the transition to the afterlife, that they would approach the world and would have to weigh their heart against the weight of her feather. So if their heart was lighter than the feather, you know, they went on to the good place, right? Or if their heart was heavier than the feather, that meant that they didn't live a life in accordance to her will, and they either had to repeat the life or would cease to exist. And so the concept of the principles and ideals of Mayat include things like truth, justice, order, balance, harmony, and reciprocity. And so to recognize that there were 42 laws of Mayat that would be read in the beginning of the day and even at the end of the day. So starting the day by saying, I will not do this, I will not do that. And then at the end of the day, said that I have not. So it's reminding you of these guiding principles. It's a code. Mayat and our ancient Kemetic ancestors recognized that there was a code to mental health. And so by living your life with these principles, that it would really foster and promote wellness and community connectedness and spirituality. So that is how I think about my clients in terms of in what ways could people's lives be out of balance, right? Or where is disorder coming in, right? Literally the concept of disorder. Or are they being honest with themselves and other people? How are they getting along in relationships? So again, I actually encourage some of my clients to go through the principles of Maya every day and recognize that the challenges they have keep coming up, and to be able to navigate that with different strategies and techniques. So a big part of understanding mental health is understanding your needs. For some reason, my clients who are majority Black women, we have a real challenge in identifying our needs and getting our needs met, right? There are systems of oppression that are impacting our ability to know ourselves and get our needs met, but to really be able to articulate to yourself in moments what need is being challenged or what do you need. I would say that's one of the best therapeutic interventions, is to constantly assess what your needs are in the moment. Are you hungry right now? Are you dehydrated just at the most basic physiological level? Or do you need to feel safe in terms of safety in your body, right? Or safety within your family or within your health? Or even going further in terms of how do you address some of your needs to feel loved or belong? Or even confidence and achievement, and then going to that self-actualization piece. So I always think about doing a needs assessment, and again, living in accordance and balance with my, but I'm gonna stop there. I don't know if it reminded Elmina of her days in my classes, but I just wanna kind of touch on some of those ancient concepts that I tried to bring into today.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna give my mic over to Tayoka.
Oh, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I'm so glad that you came through with the PowerPoint and just breaking down those concepts, because it's so important to like just track those modes of thought when like speaking, and just for us to like see and understand these concepts. So I appreciate that so much. And we're going to go ahead and
Tayoka, one moment, please, because I just saw something in the chat that I want to say.
Okay.
So Cherie says, just to mention, Maslow's hierarchy of needs was supposedly inspired by Black and Native Americans. So on our Instagram page, the Imani Instagram page, Indigenous_mental health, the other day we shared a post that we found on, I think is the Slow Factory's page. Yes, the Slow Factory. They do a lot of environmental healing work, basically saying where Maslow's hierarchy of needs like really came from. And when we have to identify our needs, we have to start from the spirit and then go up from there. Spirit, relationships, and that the more basic needs like food and all of those things, those are actually at the like top, and at the bottom, at the foundation, is the spirituality. And he kind of just didn't really incorporate that aspect of it. So if you guys want to check that out, the Slow Factory's page and our page, you can see it there. So thank you.
Yes. So the next speaker is going to be Veronica Agard. If you want to come in and introduce yourself and your work with Ancestors in Training, and you being a student, this is it. This is your time.
All right, cool. So my name is Veronica Agard. I use she, her pronouns. I am on Canarsie Lenape land in Brooklyn. I was raised on Lenape land, born on Lenape land. I've basically been in this kind of area for a long time. Yes, to the Slow Factories post. I've been thinking about that ever since I saw it. So thank you to the Imani team for posting that recently. For folks who are here that have seen or heard Ancestors in Training, y'all know I do have like slides and links and like, go read this, go do this, come talk to me like all the time. But this is a very, we're on a clock, right? So that we can not just be sharing our experiences, right? But also be in conversation with each other as well. So I am gonna share my screen for a little bit, but I'm gonna skip some things in the name of brevity, but also to answer the question of like, how did I come up with Ancestors in Training, and like, how does that show up in me being in school now for social work? The short answer to that is I was doing social work without getting paid for it or without having the degree, right? That's the short answer. The long answer is my ancestors were loud about me going back to school because I got accepted into the same program that my grandmother, who is still living, graduated from. And she is also Sagittarius, so she was very, very excited about me going back and learning and doing all these other kind of things. Culturally, I am Southern on my mother's side, and I am Caribbean on my father's side. A lot of the process of Ancestors in Training as a concept came because, what year is it? It is 2020, so 9 years ago, my paternal uncle passed away very suddenly. And I was in college at City College of New York, and to this day, I can tell you what I had on, what my father's voice sounded like, and for transparency, I'm like about 5'3". My dad is a foot taller than me, another 100 pounds, and sounded like a child, right? And that was in October. And I'm speaking in reflection of Ia, what you said earlier about knowing the seasons. And then that following January, my grandmother, same side, but my namesake, Helen Veronica, passed away. We argue that she knew that her son went home and she chose to be with him, right? So for me now, I realize as an adult, because that happened when I was 20, 21. Now, as I approach 30, I realized that that was my window of grief actually became a portal towards understanding myself and my relationship with my ancestors and like the places that I call home, right? Because when my uncle and my grandmother passed away, the ancestral or the recent familiar story that I was my grandmother's only grandchild turned into, no, you were the favorite, you were her namesake. Here are all the other people that know about you, but you don't know about them, right? So I actually had the honor to go back to St. Kitts 2 years ago and got to spend time with my cousins. And one of the things that I was crying about was that it took death for me to actually connect with these people. But then by the end of the trip, I realized that grief and death and all of those kind of things are, and the way that we react to them, especially if we're talking about our mental health, is because we have love and we have life and we want to give to things that we can't physically interact with anymore, right? So spirituality and having a relationship with your ancestors is a way to close that gap, at least for me. So that looked like me going to St. Kitts, that looked like me talking to ancestors and like, and getting to know some of the names within, because my, like I shared earlier, on my mother's side, my Southern ancestry, I can go back to the plantation where most of my ancestors were on, right? I can do the same with my side from St. Kitts and like traced it all the way back to the original port of call, for lack of better terminology right now, that was actually in Jamaica, which explained why I had Jamaican cousins, but I didn't understand why they were my cousins when I did a DNA test, right? But my ultimate paternal line is a bit of a question mark due to trauma between my grandfather and my grandmother, right? So there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of pain that ancestrally is not mine, right? So in order for me to figure out how to navigate that, in one of my other creative works, which is also how I known for in this kind of time is Who Heals the Healer. One of the sessions that I did, my now Baba Lao showed up randomly, you know, because spirit was funny and loud, and he was also Guyanese and also did capoeira. And I was like, where have you been? Like, and he's also a Sagittarius too. So I was like, I feel super seen right now. Which ancestor set this up, right? So, and ever since I've found him, I'm able to go, okay, like, what do I need to know? Like, what do I need to do, right? So I want to echo that mentorship is important. Mentorship is really important, especially as you're digging into things. And I don't mean mentorship in just like the traditional sense, but I mean like having people that you respect, being able to shed light on certain things, and also to hold space for you as we're talking about safety and meeting people's needs. And I know for like my relationship with him has helped me grow spiritually. And of course, like one of the things that can't happen during Corona is initiation. So I'm like, oops, I'm gonna just have to wait on that. But I would like to say that I am a not yet initiate of IFA, right? So here we go with me attempting to share the screen. If I can find it, yeah, we're gonna share that screen. So, because of course I never remember. It doesn't matter how many Zooms that happen, like something like this techie, I'm always like, huh? Okay, cool. So there is a slideshow clearly, but I will drop this in the chat because it has videos of me explaining ancestors in training as a concept like from 2 years ago. But essentially, when I was thinking through like my own personal ancestral work, I found the work of Yeye Lushatish. She wrote a book called Jambalaya. And the quote that I'm about to say is not from that book, but I read it and I was like, okay, I need to explore this. The quote is, "We are the ancestors of the future, and what we do now will have an impact." And I said, bet, right? Like I need to figure out how to navigate and how to have that worldview as I interact with people. So that video from when I did a session with a series, actually, excuse me, with the Caribbean Cultural Center, which is here in New York City. They recorded me explaining that, but essentially it brings together Indigenous to the Americas teachings and lessons with Indigenous to the continent of Africa, cosmologies and different ideologies of how to be not only in service for the next 7 generations, but also how to be in good character in this present moment. So it comes in the form, like ancestors in training as a concept also comes in the form of questions. So one of the questions is like, what does it mean to be an ancestor in training in the face of climate grief, hyperconsumption, and uncertain future? Can you be somebody's ancestor without having direct descendants? How can we live lives that our descendants in the next 7 generations can be proud of? And given the state of the world, what environment will the next 3 generations inherit? Never mind 7, right? So a lot of what ancestors in training has become in this particular moment for me is a concept around sustainable legacies. So not just legacies in the sense of familial and, you know, bloodlines, but also like chosen ancestors and chosen family, and also like expanding on the fact that like as people of color, and particularly Black people, we make people our aunts and cousins and all these uncles, all these other kind of extended family members that we don't share blood with, but we choose to be invested in and we choose to be in right relation with those people, right? So then when those people pass, right, like what kind of legacy do they leave behind, right? And in that example, the legacy that they leave behind is that if we are not fortunate to come from a family that we feel meets our needs, that we can create our own families, right? That we can create different legacies that don't have to do with all of the isms that we experience. So I'm gonna skip ahead. But one of the things that I also think about right now, especially having read Pleasure Activism a couple of times, but one of the things that I think about in reflection of that is this is a pullout quote from an essay that I wrote recently, but essentially it says, is it possible to embolden intimacy in a way that it becomes intergenerational, that it becomes one's gift, that it becomes somebody's legacy, right? I'm paraphrasing what I said, but essentially what is happening is that there is a sense of, especially when we talk about the Black psyche, I think about how there's so many things that we see, that we are inundated with, that we were never designed to see, right? So when we think about Black Lives Matter and we think about all of those different kinds of movements that are happening and how we're so interconnected with social media, I have to remind myself that I was not meant to know every single tragedy in the world that is happening within a couple of clicks. My brain was not designed for that. Our brains were not designed for that. If I'm the first person to tell you, we're not meant to see that. We're not meant to see mass grief on a scale like what we can see. But since we have the internet, my hack is to choose joy and to say, okay, if I can find all of this grief, I gotta be able to find the opposite. I have to, right? Because if it's too much to process and absorb, like Patricia just said, I believe in spectrums, both and. So I'm like, if there's grief, there can be love and there can be joy. You can't have one without the other. That's my own opinion. So I subscribe to and I find pages on Instagram and Twitter that affirm me, that share messages, that uplift my energy, that uplift my spirit. So that if I am gonna be on my phone for probably too long, I can at least see things that affirm me as opposed to things that harm me, right? And that's just because I have a better relationship with my own mental health, and I know myself enough to know, like, if I see one too many things, then I'm probably gonna be upset, or I may see one too many videos, or I'll see people reacting to another life being taken away by the state, and I'll say a silent prayer, please don't let that video show up on my feed. Please, I hope my feed is curated enough that the people that are here are not going to show me that, right? And I'm trying to think what else. In terms of being an ancestor and training directly, what that means is, in the literal sense, is that you're moving in the world knowing that your time is finite, that you're not going to be here forever, right? But it also says, okay, with the time that you have, what are you going to do? What do you, so in a more direct ancestral spiritual sense, something I think of is when somebody calls my name and puts my picture on the altar, what do I want them to petition me for? Do I want them to find words because I'm good at writing? Do I want them to find joy because of what I just said around joy? Something I at almost 30 think about. And I'm saying that that is a big age, but I'm saying that that's a milestone, right? Because some of the lives that have been taken did not reach that age, right? So I even think about that. I've lived long enough for certain things to happen, right? In terms of joy, I think about the fact that I've aged enough to have laugh lines when I think something is really fun, as opposed to being oh my God, I'm about to have all this other extra stuff, right? I shift my mindset a little bit. And I also remember that, melanated people, we age really well because of melanin. So then I'm all right, let's just move on. But I think in that way, and I also make sure on a spiritual tip that anyone that is in my company, especially romantically, I'm you need to know that you're gonna see some crystals, or you might see my head wrapped, or I might not let you touch my head, right? Going back to what the professor said, there's certain things that you can do, there's certain things that you can't do, but I'll let you know though, right? And I think, especially as we think through and as science confirms ancient technology. So for example, scientists in whatever year recently were oh yeah, we actually realized that smoke cleansing, you know, actually detoxes the air. Every Indigenous person that I know was like, no shit. Really? Like, that doesn't actually do something to the air, you know? But then the other part of that extension, or the extension of thought, says smoke cleansing, particularly in the United States, was illegal in most places up until the 1970s. That's not that long ago, right? That those kind of traditions that were sacred, especially to the Indigenous folks here in the United States, were particularly vicious, right? And one of those things that I think through about being an ancestor in training is to also look to the past to be able to do better in the present and in the future. So when folks are like, oh, you know, like, I'm gonna get the sage, I'm gonna get the Palo Santo, and I'm gonna cleanse myself, and that's it. I'm like, did you seek an elder? Did you do something else? Like, did you go to therapy? Did you consider therapy? What else do I usually say in that same breath? I'm like, or like when people are like, oh, I'm gonna get this rose quartz and I'm gonna manifest my true love in this voice and everything will be fine with my life. I'm like, yes, crystals, but also you need to put in that shadow work. Like, yes, you need to do some of these things. You potentially need to undo some cycles, you know? Yeah, that's my fake, like, wellness practitioner voice of like, yeah, you know, just meditate. And, you know, especially this past June, with Blackout Tuesday and that whole mess, and like the idea versus the application and how that completely missed the mark, right? Like, there's certain things that we also, like Patricia just said in the chat, like there's certain things that we kind of intuitively go, right? But we need to continue to listen to that intuition. Most of the time, that is our ancestors being like, that ain't for you, just on. Like, I actually, unfortunately had an incident on Friday night in this building that I live in where I was called the N-word by some neighbors who assumed that I did not live in this building, and they told me to go home. Now, the reading that I had 2 weeks ago from my Baba said, don't argue with people. Do not argue with people, do not argue with women. I was like, okay, I don't know why I'm being told not to argue with women, but check. One of the people who was trying to start a whole argument was a woman. And I happened to be with a very tall, masculine presenting person. And my ancestors put him in my path to be like, nope, Veronica, you're not gonna directly deal with this. He's gonna make sure that you're safe and y'all can go, right? Because even the voice in which I'm speaking, this is my normal talking voice. In that moment, I sounded like this. I was just like this. And I was like, I don't normally talk in that voice, so I don't know which one of my ancestors came down to make sure that I had a cool head. But as soon as I left that situation on Friday night, there was actually a physical fight with that woman who was using racial epithets, and she kept saying it at other Black people. And unfortunately, one of those people that she kept saying that to put hands on her. Now, we can argue about, you know, don't say something wild and, you know, people might not want to swing at you. But I was very proud of my ancestors that literally were just like, nope, you need to leave. Just leave now. Don't ask why. Don't argue. Kept running through my head. Like, do not argue, do not do anything. You just need to get out of this space. So, but if I didn't have a good relationship with my ancestors, if I didn't have a good relationship with my spirit, I would not have heard it. And I would not have felt so calm to be like, okay, that's unfortunate. We're like, just literally just left. Because if I did not leave when I did, there would have been a whole situation. And I always say, like, especially to my, knowing the Orishas that cover me, I was like, that's not a war that people want, so I'm gonna just go over here, right? Like, just, and I left it alone. But that kind of understanding of myself and what kind of ancestor I want to be Now I'm like, okay, whatever descendants of mine call on me, they may also call on me when there's a situation like that where they need to be safe, where they need to have a cool head in a very hot situation, right? Because unfortunately, there are going to continue to be moments like that in our lives that try us, spiritually, emotionally, that try our safety. But I think that having a relationship with our ancestors and our spirituality, and knowing that we are alive in this moment, because the universe conspired for us to be present in this moment. It's a practice to get to that level of understanding. I don't want anybody to see this or hear me right now and be like, oh, she's got this all figured out. No, it is an everyday practice, right? It is an extended, deliberate practice in order to have this kind of mentality in spite of the ways in which the world moves. And I really am grateful to be alive in a time where conversations like this can happen, but also spirituality and religions that bring us back to ourselves are being uplifted as opposed to being demonized. And we're doing the work of like being ancestors in training that had good character by saying like, okay, we're going to keep having conversations around these things, and we're going to keep talking about these faith systems, and we're going to undo some of these stereotypes and these stigmas, and we're going to go back to the root, right? Because if we don't go back to the root, you know, then who will?
Yes.
Thank you for folks that are like, I'm sorry that really happened. Thank you, Sharice, about that James Baldwin quote. I didn't plan on speaking about that, but I actually, the way that I weaved the conversation, I was like, nah, this is important, right? And I want to give thanks to those ancestors. I also will drop the full slideshow in the chat, so that way folks can use it as they will. I suggest that people take their time with it, because there's some writing prompts in there that will stir up some things for you, hopefully good things. But if it's less than ideal, I advise folks to, you know, take their time with it, because I will never, I won't delete the slides, or I won't delete the syllabus. Oh, oops. The almost academic in me, not really, but like kind of sort of an academic, made a syllabus that's like, read this book, watch this video, go here, do this, do this. I will drop that in the chat right now.
Thank you so much, Veronica, and thank you so much for that beautiful segue into understanding that if we don't reclaim our knowledge systems, our ancestry, who else will do it? Because that leads us to Nema Theory. I hope I'm saying your beautiful name right. Who is a guerrilla theorist and the head of Take Back the Internet, Radical Love Consciousness. I do want to say that I have been following your work, and I really enjoy reading your posts and your writings, and it makes me understand and think about what it means to be a human being and how I can show up creatively. So thank you so much for the work that you do, Veronica, and all of the speakers. And Nema, whenever you're ready, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for what you've all shared. Like Chokia said, my name is Nema Gidere, and I'm a guerrilla theorist. Sometimes people are like, what's that? And guerrilla theory is a framework I've developed to nurture theory that is fugitive of academia, which as a space can be deeply ableist, classist, anti-Black, you know, the list goes on. But, you know, when everyone is saying today, I was also drawn to this topic of Indigenous-centered psychology through a mix of embodied lived experiences and the work of incredible Black feminist psychologists and scholars. I studied abroad at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and I took a course entitled Liberation Psychology. And that was the first time that I'd seen Fanon brought up in a psychosocial context. And it really affirmed a lot of my own experiences, thinking about existing at the intersections of like race and indigeneity and wellness. But from there, I've actually been thinking about it more within the realm of our digital landscapes. So my work around data healing really explores digital health as a concept. You know, right now we're living in a time where social media has a grip on our psyche and we're under the hold of surveillance capitalism, which is a system put in place to harvest our culture and ideas and cultural production in exchange for profit. And so I wanted to start off, I moved around my slides in response to kind of things that people were saying. Hold on. So yeah, currently my work investigates what I've come to call data trauma. Let's present this. I attended a class last year in 2018, actually, entitled Neo-Cyberfeminisms, held by an 18-year-old creative technologist. And she said, data trauma is a real thing. And that was the first time I'd felt those experiences be put to words in such a way. And I started to think, you know, if there is data trauma, there must also be data healing. So a lot of my work engages with like articulating how data trauma comes up in our lives and its impacts on our psychosocial well-being. So this is a slide I made. It says, digital grief is a prime example of how our emotions are affected by our online environment. And I think about that a lot. You're talking about June when there was a wave of protests and seeing so much Black trauma on the internet and kind of wondering what is the space for our mental, spiritual, social well-being in a climate like that? And so data healing has kind of been born as a project to identify the links between technology, spirituality, and nature, because those are three arenas that people don't often connect, but they're deeply interconnected with each other. And so a big part behind data healing is trying to expand what our thinking of technology is. You know, a lot of indigeneity has technology foundationally as a part of it. Conversation is technology, food is technology. All of these systems and processes for really archiving and documenting our cultures are technologies. The body is a technology that holds our memory, our spirit, etc. So this is just a slide from the data healing page. We're also thinking about language as programming. How does the language that we interact with ourselves and with the climate, how does that shape our programming and contribute to our collective trauma? So at the top right, there's a slide from a member of the Radical Love Consciousness Collective who made a plugin that changes language that relates to nature to what it actually is. So instead of play dirty fuels, instead of saying conversation, it replaces that with protection. And so I think just looking at how language creates paradigm shifts, we can think about this indigenous spirituality when we center spirituality as the core of wellness. And that leads me to re-indigenization. So in the last couple of years, you know, you hear a lot of people speaking about decolonization, right? Let's decolonize this, decolonize that. But at Radical Love, we're really thinking about re-indigenization, which we describe as a twofold process. So first, it is the abandonment of ideals and systems established through colonization. And secondly, it's an evolution towards and rememory of ancient modes of knowledge and community. And I think we're talking about how Blackness and Black people are usually excluded from indigeneity, and it's because of this factor of displacement, right? We are a displaced peoples. And when you're raised in a land, when you're separated from the land, you're taught that you can no longer think of yourself as indigenous. But re-indigenization is really pushing us to think about how we can reclaim these practices, not understanding that we can't return to a perfect semblance of the past, but that we can forge new futures and carry our indigeneity through our ways of life. There's a close mentor of mine who once defined culture for me. And they said, culture is communal meditation through lifestyle. I'll say that again. Culture is communal meditation through lifestyle. And so when I think about how we can re-indigenize our culture, I think about returning to these ways of life as practices, gardening, etc. And at Radical Love, we're thinking about re-indigenization in 4 brackets. We call it the re-indigenization 10s. So we must re-indigenize technology to defend against the colonization of our creativity. This is connected to what I was saying earlier about how social media has a strong grip on our psyche. And as Black people, it has an extractive relationship because our culture is being mined for profit. But we also have to re-indigenize education. There's a lot of elitism and anti-Blackness in high academic spaces, which fail to legitimize our true embodied Indigenous experiences and instead pathologize us. So at Radical Love, we're thinking about what it looks like to return to grassroots and communalist education networks, peer-to-peer learning environments, conversation like the one we're having here, and having that be a guerrilla mode of developing consciousness. We're also thinking about nutrition being a place where we've been de-indigenized and we need to heal. What does it look like to reclaim the skills of the soil that have been stolen from us for generations after being profited on for centuries before that? And I think about that a lot, especially being in New York City versus being in the village with my grandmother. I spent 6 months this year on my grandmother's farm on the border of Uganda. And it was completely different. It felt like a deeply re-indigenized experience of being with the soil. But being here in the city, I'm seeing that there are people still making waves. There's urban gardens. There's a revolution, really, of people getting back to the land. And that is re-indigenization. And lastly, we must re-indigenize spirituality. I think that in our society, there are institutions, specifically the institution of capitalism, which has epitomized the dollar as God, and really taken us away from the sacred systems of the sun, the moon, the water. And the sooner we're able to divest from those toxic, violent institutions, extractive institutions, then we can come closer to our indigenous, practices without that stigma, without that shame. So taking it back to the internet, when I think about what it looks like to re-indigenize technology, I really think about understanding like what the roots of the internet are. The internet actually just replicates nature. I have a theory that the mushrooms are the original internet. They have an information superhighway underneath the ground, mycelial networks in which they pass together not only information about the health of the soil, but they also tangibly pass nutrients through the land to one another. And so I think a lot, we were speaking earlier about maroon communities. What does it look like to have digital maroon communities, networks that are fugitive of these kind of predatory platforms that we're engaging with? And another part of re-indigenizing technology is reclaiming what we understand algorithms to be. Right now, people speak a lot about Instagram's algorithm and how it promotes photos of people's faces rather than text photos, and it's not chronological. But algorithms are more than Western. This is a passage from this article called 3,000 Years of Algorithmic Rituals, the Emergence of AI from the Computation of Space. And it talks about how the Babylonians used algorithms for deciding points of law. The Chinese used the word shu, meaning rule, process, or stratagem, for both mathematics and in martial arts. So there are a wide range of ways we can think about algorithms. I think we can think about what does it look like to ask ourselves what algorithms of healing could look like, processes and systems and like structures for facilitating our healing as Indigenous people who are now dealing with this new infrastructure of the internet. And for me, another framework that I've been theorizing around is a term I call Afro-presentism. And I defined that in 2017 as a genre fusing documentary, archival, and fine arts on and through new media and the expression of an Afrofuturist lived reality. Even the fact that we're able to have this conversation about our Indigenous faith on these digital platforms, that is us living out Afrofuturism. Africa and in the future, it's not the future, it's the present. And so from there, I've been really engaging with this framework of presentism as a verb, like radical presence as a verb, and reclaiming the moments of everyday experience as technologies. So for me, like this journey of mental health and indigeneity is about rooting back in the present moment, rooting back into my body and into my sustenance, into my breath patterns, and having that be a mode of resistance and a mode of maintaining my indigeneity. So yeah, I think, hold on. That was a lot I just threw at y'all, but yeah, that's kind of the synthesis of the guerrilla theories that I've been engaging with. And one thing I loved about this program is that it was intergenerational and that the speakers went in, in the progress of our ages. And so I noticed that the internet came up as a topic towards the second half. And I always say that a big part of my practice as a theorist and an artist is archiving my coming of age online. I'm the first generation to really have come of age with these technologies. And so in addition to negotiating all of these other parts that influence wellness, like community and land, etc., I also have the web to negotiate with. And so it's impossible for me to kind of to engage with my mental health without thinking also about my digital wellness, about my digital communities, and really envisioning the future of Blackness online and Blackness interconnected. So yes, thank y'all so much.
Everything that you threw at us, I feel like we caught it. I definitely caught all of it. And literally it was like, that was really powerful. Yes, all of it. Especially when thinking about these digital maroonage and Afrofuturism. I'm like, it's going into Q&A almost, and I'm like, I need to be a part of these digital maroon communities, because even thinking about, I guess, like Black radical ideas and the spaces that we have in the US is few and far between. I've been thinking about this a lot, you know, and when we think about imagining a different world, using our radical imagination, using African spirituality to envision something differently, I haven't really thought too much about the internet, you know? So this conversation and the work that you're doing is definitely important, and I would love to just plug in more and engage more, because I learned a lot, and it's very powerful and it's very needed. I guess also me growing up in the age of, you know, technology, and seeing how that needs to be incorporated outside of just a look, especially when thinking about Afrofuturism. It's an aesthetic, but we have to move way past the aesthetic and look into what does it really mean? What is the practice that we're implementing every day? What is the culture that we subscribe to? So yeah, that was very affirming for me. Definitely learned a lot. Yes.
I want to say thank you to all the speakers, and thank you for bringing in with the internet, just putting into perspective how much we're really using it. It needs to be reflective of us, you know, especially now during COVID, we're on the internet more than usual.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing that up. And thank you, Veronica, for sharing such personal stories that really puts these things in context. And Dr. Billy Shaka and Ia, I want to thank you all, because your emphasis on relationships and balance is really, and Ma'at, that's really related to Libra energy, and it's Libra season right now. And it's so interesting that our people and indigenous peoples are from cultures on all continents, the way that we understand our needs and the way that we understand to our, it's not on hyper individualism, as you all were saying. And from an astrological perspective, in the Western sense, it's flipped. It's Aries is just like, this is identity, and that's all. The only part of identity is just Aries, right? And it's so important to have balance in our lives and importance of relationships in our lives. So I'm gonna open it up for questions now. Anybody here can put questions in the chat for the speakers.
I also wanted to say that even in the space of all of us talking in this conversation, that I'm just really grateful. And speaking of being present, you know, right now, and speaking of like the Afro future, and speaking of what we're doing, it's, yes, very much processing, but very much also being grateful for this space being held. And it's affirming so much of like just the inner work and the work that, you know, I'm doing, and the work that all of us are doing. And I'm just beyond grateful to just be in space, be in community, and really be in conversation with you all. So I definitely just wanted to say that again. And any questions, processing, we can take time, for sure.
Someone said,
would you speak more? Patricia said, would you speak more about not touching the head, Veronica? The significance of touching your head. What significance does that have?
Yeah, so in the African spiritual system, and also Indigenous, like, so the whole point of this is to complicate the word Indigenous, right? But I'm gonna speak to within what I know about the Ifa traditions, right? Every year, depending on your spiritual home, like your Ile or your house will have, like, here's what everybody who's related to us in this house, in this container, in this community needs to pay attention to for the year. in the Santeria Lucchini tradition, it's called letra del año, like literally the letter of the year, right? But in my spiritual home, something came out about do not let just anybody touch your head, right? And also what we put on it, right? So especially in terms of colors and also just like energy theory, right? Like something that came out is like, don't wear, like try to avoid black as much as you can, and especially don't put black on your head, right? Also, what else came out? And it was really heavy on the don't let anybody touch your head energy, because the Ori, which is like our own personal Orisha is how I understand it, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but that's basically like our energy, our spiritual center, right? So to think about it in a sense that I think is a little bit more conventional, it's just more so, I'm gonna say it like this because this is how I understand it. It's like how you wouldn't just have pleasurable experiences, sexual, romantic, with just anybody, like, and thinking about that as a sacred center of energy, and like, you know, if you potentially can't see a future with that person, or you can't get some kind of pleasurable reciprocal exchange with that person, then, you know, why would you give that part of yourself to that person? Why would you exchange that energy? I view that in terms of sacral, and I'm not talking about it in the sense of making assumptions on bodies, right? I'm thinking of energy centers right now. So when I say sacral, I mean the orange energy. Just like you wouldn't share that with just anybody, you wouldn't share your crown chakra energy or your purple, if we're thinking about it in the color schemes, you wouldn't just share that with just anybody, right? And there's been a lot of videos right now on Indigenous TikTok, and when I say that, I mean Indigenous to the Americas, where they're doing a lot of videos right now that explain the significance of braids in their culture. And I'm saying it Indigenous to the Americas specifically, but I know that there is such a thing, and there's the same argument for Indigenous to the continent, you know? And especially in terms of like slavery, and when folks were enslaved, like how they braided seeds into their hair. Like there's a whole thing about that, but I'm gonna pause unless somebody else wants to answer that.
I guess I did want to speak from a personal experience about the importance of your Ori. Like I shared when I had an ancestral reading, I was going through a lot of like spiritual situations, and I would say like initiations almost, in me coming into myself and coming into my purpose. One of the things that they told me was to take care of my Ori and to take care of my head. And when I find myself in vulnerable spaces, to wrap my head. And I think that this idea of even wrapping your head is also very important, because we say like our head is our crown, but it's also a spiritual praxis. It's a way for us to, you know, resist, and it's also a way that's truly embedded into our culture, and a way for us to protect ourselves spiritually. So wearing colors is most definitely important. I recently talked to a brother where the thing about your Ori, as far as protecting your Ori, came up again, not to wear black, like Veronica said, on your head, to wear, you know, certain colors that represent, you know, purity. In a lot of different African spiritual systems and indigenous spiritual systems, wearing white on your head is very important to cleanse that energy. And it's very important for us to be very mindful of the things we put on our head, even when it comes to the products that we use, the things in the way in which we go about taking care of our Ori and that energy. So I did just want to speak to that. And if anyone, you know, had any other suggestions or any understandings of the Ori, you can definitely go in and offer that to the space in the conversation.
Thank you all for sharing. There's another question in here that says, would love to hear thoughts about, Are you asking about, you said African spirituality beyond African spirituality? Are you speaking to African American spirituality such as hoodoo? If so, in terms of talking about it and reframing religion versus spirituality, I really want to get to this question because it's so depthful, but if you could, what's this? Catlow. Catlow, if you could please let us know what did you mean here?
Is it okay if I join the Zoom? Is that
Yeah, I
fine?
was giving you permission to do that because I was
Okay.
reading it, but I was like, I don't want to get this wrong, and I want to be to direct this to the right person. I think Ia talked on Hoodoo, said that this is Hoodoo Celebration Month earlier, and I think you were talking about more African American based, right?
Well, the thing is, so let me just kind of restructure this question so that it kind of makes sense. I was really asking about the connotation of African when referring to African spirituality, and how the way it has been used in this conversation is in referring to, the Yoruba, Cuban, Haitian, West African, and sort of West Indies traditions. But as we all know, and I'm sure as everybody understands, Africa is vast, and the spirituality differs amongst its myriad of demographics. So in talking about African spirituality, I'm from Botswana, which is in Southern Africa. So when we talk about African spirituality, I think Botswana traditions. And so I was wondering if there have been any sort of I don't know, scholarship or movements, or I guess just avenues to explore African spirituality beyond just the traditions that were mentioned in today's talk, which is the West African and the West Indies and sort of Caribbean cultures. So like in exploring African spirituality, like as a diasporic, as a broader diasporic concept versus just ones that have been inherited from those cultures that were mentioned today.
I'm happy you brought that up because I actually have strong ties and connections to Sangoma tradition, which is more like South Africa. It's all of Bantu people really, because our lineages are all tied together. But I'm happy you brought that up, and I'm happy you brought up the aspect of diversity. So even if we just took the one tradition of Ifa that was mentioned, and you go to Nigeria, they're all doing Ifa, but it differs depending on what part of Nigeria you're in. Because one thing that's important to remember about African spirituality is very much dependent on being in harmony with your particular environment and your situation. So even though there's some themes that are shared across the board, there are certain things that are done specifically for you to be in harmony with like what's around you and reflects your specific environment. So I do have some resources on that, some research on that. I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm a graduate student doing community psychology at FAMU, Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and it's an African-centered psychological program. And even before coming to that, I had some professors at Howard and UDC expose me to different African-centered ways of thinking, and through my assignments, I've amassed a lot of resources and a lot of research on these different parts of Africa, Namibia, South Africa, different places, and I'll be happy to email everybody that. I'll also email everything that was shared here, the PowerPoints, the links, and all of that, and also all of the information of the speakers. And Nema, you can go ahead. I know you wanted to say something.
Oh yeah, no, I'm really grateful that question came up as well, because I'm East African. I was born in Kenya. And in my country, we've lost a lot of our indigenous practices. So interestingly enough, I've looked towards the diaspora for practices. There's the two main places I've really been like ushered into Black African spirituality is one in Cape Town in South Africa, and with Sangomas, and two in Brazil through Candomblé. And so it's interesting for me as someone who was born in Africa, in East Africa, to then come to America and have my perspective on African spiritualities broadened, and to have new pathways and possibilities to like pull from, because like this ancestor lineage is not just like through specific blood ties. I think I find a lot of ancestors from other places as well. But I do think anything that is labeled African blank, the label African can never hold enough of what it's burdened to. It's like thrown around to mean so many different imbalanced things, that yeah, there is this yearning for specificity, and I think there's room for that specificity. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm going to go, the next question is going to be for Dr. Billy Shaw. I think would be the best equipped to answer this question. It's from Regina. It says, would love to hear thoughts on how to integrate African-based psychology with SMI, severely mentally ill population. I'm a mental health counselor in this population, inpatient currently, but also am an African ritualist looking to integrate training, life, and experiences. So thank you for sharing that. It's one of Imani's dreams. One of this network's, our dream goal is to have a mental health facility that would kind of take place of what we would call psych wards now, that operate in very conditions that are similar to prisons in some cases. So I'm happy you brought up that we need to acknowledge our folks who have the more complex mental health issues. And I think that Dr. Billy Chaka's experience as a clinician, she can speak to that.
Thank you. Well, I tend to work with the worried well. That's the population I tend to work with in terms of people who are, full-time employees someplace or run a business. But I'm very mindful too of the severely mentally ill from an African-centered perspective, being about going through initiations, right? If looking at, like I was bringing up earlier, Malidoma Some, or thinking about Credo Mutwa, that they talk about mental illness in an African-centered sense in terms of learning to better understand the voices in your head, right? In terms of not to be frightened of them, but to understand them and to have discernment in the voice. So I think that comes from initiation, and I'm, not initiated at the level to be able to initiate somebody through that process, but I know that there were methodologies to address mental health and wellness through through the broad systems of African spirituality and culture, right? There were always ways to care for our mental health, and a big part was actually building skills and navigating voice. So that's my biggest reaction or reflection, and even thinking about divination, and just even like removing yourself from certain spaces and understanding like how to connect with, I guess, almost inanimate objects we can call, and to be able to like channel and focus on things. So I'm not there yet in terms of studying that, but I know that there are practitioners on the continent who have strategies around, again, clarity of voice.
Thank you for shedding light on that, of the voices. And while you're here, someone else has a question for you. Says, Dr. Afia, I'm studying to be a mental health counselor, and I was wondering if there were things you learned that you either disagreed with or thought could be broadened.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Where do I begin? I think that there were a lot of challenges translating what's written in a textbook to actually practice. I think the best way that I learned how to be a therapist was to be a therapist. It might sound weird, but I think that one of the strongest skill sets in being a therapist is to learn how to listen. Learn how to listen in terms of being observant and paying attention to body language and paying attention to tone and even the sensations you have in your own body. This is going to sound really odd to the Western ear right now, but I remember when I started working with clients and I felt a certain sensation in my left arm. I don't think I was having a heart attack or anything, but I would feel a certain sensation in my left arm if I felt like this person was going to harm themselves or other people. And no supervisor or textbook said to listen to like your left arm to see if this person needs to be hospitalized, but it was pretty accurate. That, I don't know why my left arm was where it happened, in terms of the intuition of like, this person might actually harm themselves. And so I think that that's paying attention to your like clinical eye or clinical ear. And again, the sensation of doing therapy, I think could be expanded much more. But yeah, just really, it's a sensory experience in terms of really listening, really looking, and thinking about like your own reactions to things.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the next question would be good for Ia. The person sent it privately, so I'm not going to say their name. But basically, they're looking for authentic spaces to find people who are engaging in Black spirituality, Indigenous spirituality in an authentic way, because we know that some people misuse these practices. And Ia is part of, she has various ministries, and she's also in interfaith spaces. So if you could speak more to some of the projects that you're a part of, Ia, that actually engage in these practices in an authentic way. Mm-hmm. I know most of them are in New York. I'm not sure if this person is in New York, but maybe you all may have some virtual programs going that this person can check into.
Oh, yes. In relation to the work that I do, I am connected to a network of authentic and very well educated people, I should say, or experienced people in the Orisha tradition. In particular, there are two walks of Orisha tradition. There's the Lukumi, which came by way of Cuba into the U.S. through the Cubans who migrated here, and then there is the Isheshe, which is directly from Nigeria, which came later on. And so I have connections to that. Yes, you do have to be careful because people say who they are, and there is no regulatory system, and there's no particular schools that you can go and get your certificates from. So you have to be careful. Definitely get involved with, not only to make sure that they're authentic, but to make sure that they are the type of house, the type of a community that you want to be involved with. So if you want to connect with me, I can definitely help you get there. I work along with my spiritual godmother, who is a priestess of 33 years in the Lukumi tradition. I've known her for over 20 years, and I work along with her. And if it's something that, is not within our particular circle of things that we do, we can definitely connect anyone with someone that is doing it, that is authentic, and that is someone good to connect with. Now, the other thing that I do in my particular work is I also am an interspiritual Indigenous faith minister, where I work with people to connect them with where their deeper spirituality, where they want to go, whether it's Indigenous practices or it's, people walk an alternative path, which means that they're not necessarily wanting to get deeply involved in any particular thing that's organized, but they want to practice their faith that in a non-traditional way. So I also help with that. Because in the space of Indigenous practices, it is hard to authenticate. It's usually word of mouth, through people who know people who know people. And that's how we do it, because there's a lot of folks on the internet and that are saying that they know certain things. And I've seen their work, and I can attest to the fact that a lot of people don't know what they're doing, that are saying that they are these folks that have this information. So I'm available. It doesn't have to be me, but I can definitely connect you if you like. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Yes. I'm so happy that you're able to do that and also be a connector for other people, because I find that too, like in my personal life, like I may not be the person, but I know the person, and just, you know. Let's see, any other questions here? So Patricia asked something, I answered in the chat, but I think it's something that can be, it's a question that other people may have, but they may not have said it. So what if someone's completely new to this, completely new to African spirituality, completely new to indigenous things? They don't know what to do. They don't know what to ask, right? Should I seek guidance now? Should I seek an elder now? Should I just work with myself now? Like all of these things, right? And I feel like at the core,
Where'd you go?
I was muted this whole time.
Where you
No,
were,
not the whole time.
Oh, I wasn't? Okay.
It kind of clicked out. Yeah.
Okay,
It
so
just
I was
did.
saying that if you're new to this journey, the concept of the higher self is something, or the Ori as we've been calling it here, your head, your Ori, your personal spiritual guide. It's like the spiritual soul essence part of you that existed in the spiritual realm before you became a human body, right? Your intuition, that. And that part of you is what eventually connects you to what specific ancestors are guiding you. Then on top of that, what specific Orishas, spirit guides, or Loa, Neteru are guiding you, and then above that, who's going to be your teacher, and all of these things. If your personal higher self is not together, it'll be hard to get clear on what you need to ask. It'll be hard to find a mentor and all of these things. So really take time to build a connection with your higher self. Nature was mentioned earlier, right? Connect with the elements of nature, meditate in the shower, take a walk by the river, and just allow your connection, your personal connection with the elements to birth in you various ideas or show you what you're gifted in. You'll start to see that you'll start to have certain affinities, certain elements of certain things when you spend time with yourself and connecting in a genuine way, and just making the time to really want to explore that. And then your higher self will send you signs and synchronicities. You'll start to be connected with your spirit guides through symbols. Sometimes they may show up as themselves, or sometimes they show up as an animal. Somebody brought up in the private chat earlier here the use of animals in many of our indigenous traditions. So there's always signs, there's always symbols. We just have to make the time to clear our head to connect to them.
I know for me, I just wanted to speak on that. I know that while I was in school, I took a study abroad trip to Salvador Bahia, and Cotton Blade has been one of the African spiritual systems that has made its way to me. And I learned that a lot of my ancestors traveled, like many of our ancestors, they traveled to Brazil or Cuba, and then they came to the US. And in me learning that, when I was in Brazil, I was really sad. I went to a house and I began to cry. And I remember one of the healers there, one of the women there, she was like, "Why are you crying? Like, she asked me, she's like, why do you do this to yourself? The Orisha will present themselves to you. You don't have any need to worry about your connection to this spiritual practice and what you should be doing and how far along you should be." So I think that as time went on and I started to invest more into like my purpose, me also understanding and drinking tea with my ancestors,